Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the final Sales and Marketing Leadership Incubator session of 2021. My name is Mike Dixon. I lead the Sales and Marketing practice for AXR Recruitment and Search, and today's guest is Robbie Lawson, who leads Google's tech and telco practice. Welcome, Robbie. How are you this morning?
Very well, Mike. Slightly disappointed about yesterday's cricket, and I've got no doubt that's going to come up, so I thought I'll bring it up first. Thank you very much for having me.
That's all right. And an early Merry Christmas, everybody. Robbie and I are getting into the festive spirit. My hat kind of moves around a fair bit, which is going to annoy the hell at me as we go. So I might take it off, but we'll see how we go. So guys, before we get into and you know, if you've got any questions in the cricket, there's a chat there. So just fire them in. Being Scottish, but with Australian citizenship, I'm supporting the Aussies. Robbie clearly supporting the losing team. Unlucky. But before briefly, for those of you, I think we've emailed Robbie's bio around, but we're going to explore that move to Google, because Robbie's career prior was a pretty stellar FMCG career, working with some of the largest FMCGs on the globe, and from L'Oreal to Mars and Unilever. So in fact, a remarkably similar career path to a previous guest, Hannah Fold. I'm not sure whom followed whom there, Robbie, but it appears that you worked at the same companies at the same time almost.
That's right, yes. Intertwined careers, and it's been great. We've kept in touch a lot, and it was fun to watch her a couple of weeks ago. I thought she'd be great.
Fantastic, cool. Well, let's get into it, and you know, before we kind of kick into everything about your career and advice, Robbie, just a couple of questions on you. Now, we're going to explore your career path, but one of the questions I love asking guests is, was there a dream job, you know, putting the current career to one side, that you dreamt of doing when you were younger?
Yeah, Mike, I think similar to Hannah the other week, actually, I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to do. I was really into photography and writing. So I had a dream of being a photographer or a journalist. Loved travel. I loved the creative and technical side of photography, you know, like the darkroom. And I ended up studying arts at Trinity College in Dublin. So I think I was a bit of a dreamer, really. But my dad sort of nudged me into line and sort of gave me the advice to learn a bit about business and try and join a graduate scheme. And I applied to a bunch coming out of uni and got my way onto the L'Oreal one in London. And that was obviously where Hannah was. And I just fell in love with the buzz of sales. The fun of client interactions and the competitive nature of what we do, and that team dynamic. And I guess, yeah, I just got hooked on it and stayed on that path.
Great. And you've worked some really impressive businesses, Robbie, through your career, and so that comes with privileges. And I imagine in terms of things you might get to do, is there a particular kind of corporate perk when you look back, you think, well, that was cool. That's a highlight in terms of things I've been able to do in my line of work.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the one that stands out the most for me was a year into Google. I had the fortune of taking a client out to Google headquarters in Mountain View in Silicon Valley. As I said, I'd only been there a year, and I was visiting the headquarters of a business that's not even 25 years old. And just to see the sheer scale, the fun, the innovation. I think the first thing we saw as we walked through was a bunch of Googlers at 8 in the morning playing beach volleyball in a sand pit. And I think even more than my clients, because I was so new, I was the one walking around with my eyes popping out my head at everything that we saw. So that was pretty special.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We'll get into Google in more detail as we go. And what about business leaders? Who do you think the most interesting would be to work with, if you could pick anybody in the world?
I'm going to take the hat off now.
Yeah, I think I'll do the same.
interesting leader to business leader to work with. Yeah, I had a bit of a think about this one. I think the one that most catches my attention at the moment is Melanie Perkins. She's the founder and CEO of Canva, an Aussie built business. She's only 34 years old and is doing incredible things with that business. It has I think in the latest round, it's still private, but it has a $50 billion valuation. And I think more than anything, it's just inspiring how she has led the business to disrupt software and make it more accessible to students, young people, as well as the philanthropic element that she's just recently announced. I think it's stunning what she's doing there.
That's extraordinary. 50 billion valuation already. That's absolutely extraordinary. So talk about, large, businesses. You worked with some great ones in your career, and you had about sort of 14 or so years in FMCG before you joined Google. Why did you leave FMCG out of interest? Because a lot of people on the call and are in FMCG, not everybody, but there's a reasonable proportion. So talk us about your mindset at the time.
Well, firstly, I think it's important to say I'm so grateful for the grounding that FMCG gave me and that can give to everyone. I think there's so much energy, resilience, competition in that arena. It's really brilliant, and I do look back so fondly on it. And I'm also glad I waited as long as I did, 12 odd years in FMCG to sort of build a strong bank of experiences, build my confidence, my self-awareness of my strengths, so that when I did make the choice to broaden out, I could jump across at a decent level. It took me a while to face up to the fact that I actually wasn't that excited about a next role up in FMCG. I think the moment for me was in 2017. We'd fought as a team tooth and nail all year as a sales team. And we got to the sort of very end of December and we delivered 0.1% growth. And don't get me wrong, we were immensely proud. We'd slogged our guts out, but a whole year just to stand still, basically. And I think it was that moment I just realized I really wanted to work in a different high growth, dynamic environment for a change and see how my skills could transfer to a different arena.
Right. And when you transitioned to Google, what was it like? How did you find that transition? You talked about FMCG giving you a great grounding, but you're really moving into unfamiliar territory.
Yeah. I think like moving business anywhere, it's initially tough. And I think there's a famous expression at Google, the first couple of months, it's literally like drinking from a fire hose. Or trying to drink from a fire hose. There's so much information. There's so many different products. There's clients, different industries. The org itself, there's no easily found sort of organizational chart because it's so matrixed. The pace of change is rapid. I think the teams and structures are fluid. So to give you a feel, in the last 3 years, I think I've moved desks 6 times. And our team name has changed at least 3 times. So you have to be okay with ambiguity and sort of never knowing everything. And that can be hard to begin with. I think there's a famous phrase at Google, we talk about imposter syndrome. But then as with all sales roles, you start to work with clients. And for me, it was FMCG clients when I joined Google, and that gives you the direction. And you find out what they're trying to do, you find the themes, and then that really helps you, give you guidance, and you work on helping them achieve that with the Google tools. So I think working with clients gave me that confidence to transition to Google.
And was it what you expected, though? You talk a lot around the fluidity, ambiguity, the pace of change. When you kind of look at it from the outside in, was that kind of, you thought, well, that's what I'm going to get, or was it quite different?
Was it? I mean, was it what I expected? Yes, and more. I think. I mean, I think it's the culture that's incredibly special. Aside from the bean bags, the free food, and the climbing walls, there's an incredible heart and soul to the business, which is focused on doing the right thing and about helping each other. So I mean, you walk around, there's lots of scarily smart, very hands-on people. But the way that the business collaborates, the way that the business fosters innovation and looks to build scalable models everywhere is the essence of what makes Google what it is. So, and the best example I can kind of give you to bring it to life is this idea of peer bonuses. So if a colleague does something great to help you on a project or with some advice, you can give them a peer bonus, which lands in their pay packet the next month.
Wow.
Now it's a small amount, it's discretionary, but it just fosters and supports the philosophy of collaboration and working across the organization for the right reasons.
That's amazing. Were you able to bring something from FMCG that Google didn't have? I'm curious as to, they've hired you with your background and you were managing initially FMCG clients, but was there a skill set that you thought, actually, I've got some skills that are a little bit unique here, which are bringing something to the party?
I'm not sure I can claim anything as unique that I brought to Google, but I think more broadly what FMCG can bring to Google is a love of competitive selling in what is a maturing market for Google, right? 25 years old now, starting to mature in our market. So this idea of competitive sales is something definitely that FMCGs can bring. That idea of a category mindset that you take to clients is really valued. And I think the idea of servant leadership with the client base is also something that FMCGers will be really familiar with, working with the likes of Woolies and Coles. I also think that FMCG gives you such a strong grounding in commercial acumen and an eye for detail. I mean, certainly for me, that came at L'Oreal, which you just have to have when you're fighting for those inches every year. So I'd like to think that's what FMCGs can bring.
I think that's a really good point, Robbie. I talk to a lot of people in FMCG, and there's lots of inflection points people have in their career and think perhaps I could do something else. And there definitely is a demand, for in other sectors for what FMCG people bring around that kind of rigor of thinking, the competitiveness within a commercial environment. But I think that commercial acumen and really understanding the steps and levers to pull to kind of create profit is not unique to FMCG, but I think we're very finely attuned to figure that out, and which is relevant in a lot of different environments, which is interesting. A lot of people on today's call listening to the podcast will be thinking, well, Google's part of my life. I use it every day. I think that's great, but what does it actually do? In terms of a business proposition, in Australia, what does Google do, Robbie?
Yeah, I mean, you said it at its most simple, at a top level, from a consumer perspective, we organize the world's information, whether it's YouTube or search or the Play Store, the Google Play Store. We're trying to be helpful, be unbiased, and be trusted with consumers. But a layer down from that, I guess, is what you're asking is, as a business, we help small, medium, large size businesses be present wherever consumers are. So we like to refer to the sort of messy middle of today's purchase journey, which is now so digital. As a consumer, if you think about, I don't know, Black Friday, thinking when you were preparing for maybe a Black Friday purchase, Mike, you have your research phase where you're looking into products. You have your consideration phase where you're trying to compare different brands. and then you kind of get into that ready to purchase phase. So for some purchases, like, you know, maybe let's say like a car, there can be up to 500 different digital touch points on that journey. And I guess the question is, where's the right point for your brand to be there through that journey for a consumer? Where's it going to be most relevant? And as that journey becomes more and more complicated, Google is getting better and better at automating that and being more efficient to help businesses be there for consumers. So I guess what we do is work with clients to help them understand where's the most effective place to be. And from an FMCG perspective, we talk about Byron Sharp and physical and mental availability.
Yeah.
You know, someone like YouTube you're trying to help be there where consumers are watching videos. You're driving mental availability of your brands.
Right.
When consumers are looking to purchase or consider a brand, you can appear there on Google search, more like physical availability, like in store or on the shelf.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. So if we then look at your role, you know, describe what you actually do.
Yeah, it's a funny one. My kids asked me this one, and sort of telling their mates at school as well. To begin with, they thought that my kids thought I was the guy that, you know, when you type a search into the Google homepage, I was the guy who came up with the answers.
Dad's so clever.
I'm just sitting there behind typing. Yeah, that's not me. So no, my team is responsible for a group of clients in the tech and telco vertical. So tech being hardware, software, telcos being, you know, your big telecommunications businesses. And my role's focused on being an industry expert in that space. So understanding the executive agenda, how I can help drive digital transformation for those clients. So that means understanding their business objectives first, whether that's sales, market share growth, profit growth, and then it's essentially consultative sales, and a business person first and then a seller second, because Google has tons of products, search, YouTube, display, apps, maps, Gmail, cloud. And so you have to understand first what the objective is for your client before offering the best bits of Google as a solution.
Yeah. And if we then look at, I guess from a career perspective, in terms of, you know, the purpose behind what we do here is to, you know, help people understand career pathways, enable them to make great decisions. And so this is really informative because we're looking at it from a different perspective in a tech business. But again, we've some unfamiliarity around what does a career path look like in Google. So you're doing your role, Robbie. What might somebody who's coming in, you know, look at in terms of a pathway? Because you also talked at the beginning about the fluidity, the fact you've moved there 6 times, your team's changed names 3 times, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe looking at your pathway first, what do you go on and do? About what does a career look like at Google?
I mean, it's a tough question to answer, Mike. There's just it's up to the individual. It's really up to you in yourself. And I just mentioned how many different parts of the business there are. I mean, to put it simply, there's sales and there's engineering. But then within that, you've got ads, cloud, hardware, Android. I mean, there are just so many different opportunities within Google. And if you're mobile, Google employs over 100,000 people now worldwide. So there are literally thousands of roles open around the world. It's quite mind-boggling when you look into it. Now, obviously, it's a bit more limited at a smaller site like Australia and New Zealand. But I mean, what I'd say is it's definitely, it's not linear. There's no standard route. It's definitely less about promotion and ladders up the business. It's more about collecting experiences through the business and learning and figuring out kind of where you'd like to go in the organization that will help you find and develop your strengths. I know that sounds vague and unhelpful, but it's not valuable to try and map out an exact path through Google. I think it's trying to connect yourself to a role that gives you energy and that you know you're going to deliver in, and then go from there.
I like that thinking, because that really aligns with my view to modern career pathways. I think people do think too typically in terms of ladders, and I think we said, perhaps it was Ollie last week, talked about if you look for ladders, you might just find too many snakes. And the career is about gathering experiences, and that can come in so many different spaces. So I think the less formulaic you think about your career, the better, because that will teach you to slow down and actually have your head up and eyes open and ears open to what could be, and to try things. So I think that philosophy really works well. If you look at then again your pathway, Robbie. So you've kind of gone FMCG into Google. You're in your second role there, obviously having an impact and being successful. Would you go back to FMCG, or do you continue in tech, or do you when you start to look forward, do you explore even new sectors as well?
I don't know what you're fishing for there, Mike. Would I go back?
Got a great role for you. No, I'm kidding.
I never say never. I mean, I think for me, I find the growth in FMCG, I find the growth of D2C, direct to consumer, really exciting. Especially those FMCGs that have pivoted successfully and invested behind it to own their own customer journey and sort of nourish it with a USP, right? So I'm thinking of brands like My Muscle Chef, who've built an incredibly robust business that isn't wholly reliant on two retailers for their success. And even if I think back to like L'Oreal, where I started, they're doing an incredible job in e-com. Now nearly 30% of sales, according to publicly available data, through e-com. And there's lots of other big FMCG businesses around the 10 to 15% mark and growing. So really exciting. I think there's a lot going on in FMCG that is really promising for the future. As for me, I mean, there's still so much to learn at Google. As I said, there's tons of different industries to explore that Google services. I mentioned, some really incredible stuff happening in the software space with the likes of Canva. So not sure yet for me. We'll see. Yeah,
that's a good political answer, but that's fair. But it's fair enough, right? There's because again, the whole idea of what we're trying to do here is open people's eyes to the pathways and not just focus on one thing. So and often I get a call from somebody who wants to move because they've had a bad day or a bad week, and more often than not, I'll push them back to the current organization and say, explore, listen, think, look at all the options, because if your current role is coming to an end, there's probably another 3-4 things you could do, not just the obvious one in front of you. There's lots of other stuff you can do, which people often don't think as laterally as they should. Cool. And do you miss anything from FMCG? Do you kind of there's a certain structure and rigor to the way FMCG works, and predictability, perhaps compared to what you have right now. But do you miss much?
Oh, I really miss range reviews, Mike. At times I miss the structure, or the excitement of an NPD, new product launch. But I think mostly that's the network of friends and incredibly talented, driven people in FMCG that I miss. Yeah,
that's cool. For a lot of traditional sectors that we work with, the last couple of years during COVID has really accelerated thinking and approach to workplace flexibility in the environment that you work in, how you kind of engage individual. And the perception is that tech firms like Google are just way ahead of the curve in this space. You talked about, the visit to Google HQ, and your eyes kind of popping out your head, kind of going, wow, look at this place. But if you could just spend a moment just describing, the working environment. I don't just mean the physical environment, but the culture of a business like Google. And first of all, just to give us a window into what it's like.
Yeah, I can. I think in terms of COVID and this whole workplace effects environment piece, I think the first thing to say is it's been as much of a challenge for Google as for anybody, because face-to-face collaboration is just critical to the culture at Google. Two people standing in a lunch line coming up with ideas. I mean, that's how Google Maps came about, right? Innovation is chaotic. It's not linear, and so it's the job of everyone to drive it, and you need face-to-face collaboration to make that happen. And I think at Google we used to think that needed to be in the office, hence the famous climbing walls, the free food, and the beanbags. And it was sort of built, those offices are built to encourage what the founders called one hot mess of collaboration and chaos to breed this innovation. But I think that we've all realized through COVID that you can have a mixed environment, a hybrid environment. The philosophy is still the same. A lot of the energy now is focused on how we encourage collaboration and ideas across a hybrid working environment. So, using data to measure employee sentiment of what, and react to kind of what works, what's working, what's not working. And we still plan next year. You still come together physically for fun, for intentional connection, things like all hands, team meetings. Again, I said innovation and brainstorming. I think also for sales teams, it's interesting. It still revolves around the client and servicing that client. So COVID's brought about a huge amount of innovation in how we do virtual collaboration and how we service our clients better through that period. So things like the virtual Jamboards for getting ideas actually in a much more inclusive way than what we used to do with Whiteboard, because everyone is throwing their ideas down at the same time. Measuring how well we listen, how much we listen in a call, how much of a percentage of a call are we actually listening versus talking. I feel like I'm talking way too much on this call. Little windows in slides so that you can appear in the slides while presenting them. Things like that. I think that it's fostered a new level of innovation around how we collaborate. And in the end, the ultimate goal is just to ensure that the working environment and the culture remains fun, inclusive and fresh, whether that's from home, in the office, or a mix of both.
Yeah. So if really interesting, dealing with the same challenges, but seeing the opportunities in the same way every organization is seeing. And personally, working with lots of different companies like I do as a recruiter, large, medium, and small businesses, my overarching view of the last couple of years has been, hugely positive in terms of where cultures have evolved to. I think we have increased, collaboration, interestingly, by being at home more, and you're more task orientated, and yet at the same time, perhaps the social engagement piece is the bit that most people miss. But companies haven't stopped innovating, haven't stopped, changing and performing, and people's careers keep on moving. So we make it work. And I think some of the ideas that have come up through COVID and the ways in which we work have been fantastic. It's been a real accelerator for organizational culture in a good way. Now, if someone on today's call or listening to the podcast down the line is thinking, I do like, that transition that Robbie's achieved, moving from FMCG to Google, how would I make that happen? Is there, in terms of the pathway into Google, I imagine it's pretty competitive. I imagine it's not a case of just rocking up and you're in. But what advice would you give people who are thinking, I wouldn't mind giving it a crack?
I think firstly, advice would be, go for it. But 100%, there's a bunch of roles available and open on the Google Careers website. So have a dig and have a look around. But first and foremost, be clear on why you want to join. Read up and research online. There's a whole wealth of information about Google. And then I think in terms of how you approach it, I mean, the core job and the core skills are still going to be critical. Can you do the job? But then I think being clear on your passions and the experiences so far that have led you to here are going to be a really important part of deciding whether you and Google are going to be compatible. We're incredibly protective about our culture. There's this idea of googliness, which is about kind of curiosity. It's about humor. It's about humility. It's about a willingness to help that I mentioned earlier. So you've got to make sure that you genuinely buy into that, because that'll be expected in how you work and operate when you get here. And then I think less about culture fit. Will I fit the culture I've just described, but more like, what's your culture add? The people are curious and collaborative and smart at Google. What's your culture add? What are you going to bring, rather than necessarily just culture fit? The interview process is super clear and transparent. On the Google Careers How We Hire section, it's all kind of laid out there. And then the final thing I'd say is just be patient. I mean, it's often a matter of timing, whether there's the right role available now. Don't let that put you off. I mean, for me, I applied twice. The first time I got down to the last two, and then I was unsuccessful, and they got back in touch 2 years later for the same role. So definitely patience is a virtue.
Great. I love googliness. That's an awesome new word. And is there a particular piece of advice you've had in your career that has stuck with you? A career advice, that is.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the best piece of advice was to think about your career less as a ladder and more like a safari. I mean, a ladder just sounds so boring and linear. A safari means you choose your direction. You're encountering unexpected things that might be both scary and rewarding, but you enjoy the journey, right? And a safari still has a goal, an end point, which is fulfillment and learning through the way. But the more that you can enjoy that journey of the career and not just think about going up, but actually exploring and gathering experiences, certainly has given me much more reward on the career.
Climbing a ladder or going in safari, what would you rather do? I think safari sounds a lot more exciting.
Yeah.
Love that. Excuse me. Now, some people in careers can reach these points where they appear to be stuck. They get a certain level and they're struggling to move, on from that level. What advice would you give an individual who kind of is in that headspace or feels that things have slowed down for them?
Yeah, I think first up, be really honest with yourself. Are you feeling truly challenged in the role? What is your dream role? And are you working towards that in that current moment? I mean, you mentioned sometimes people just come to you because they're having a bad day. But if that feeling of not being challenged is kind of has been lasting a while, I think trying to define, okay, what is that dream role? Are you working towards that? And if not, taking steps to change it, I think is critical. And then I think planning ahead. So being really intentional about what you're looking for next, because it takes time to find that next role. I mean, I think in reality, it's a 3-month process. Don't leave it until you're desperate. this kind of comes across. So being really planned and using your network to kind of get perspective and advice on where you're at now and what you're working towards, I think can be really helpful. Even if you're planning to stay within the business that you're currently in, I think having those conversations upfront and early. Ollie talked about it last week, but with both your manager, with HR, just being really intentional and really clear-headed about where you want to go is going to help.
I think too many people shy away from that conversation, fearing that it's going to come across as negative. And my view is almost every business leader, direct manager is willing and open and interested in having that conversation with you. And it's up to you not to frame it as a negative conversation, but to talk about it positively in terms of your goals, as you described there. Talking about also what you can do for the business in terms that the business can benefit from. It's not just about you; it's about you're an asset for that business. So how are they going to get a return on you? So talk about it in terms of actually, where that return could be enhanced, increased by you gathering more experiences, and therefore there's an ongoing benefit to you in the business. So I think that's pretty good. When you're in recruitment mode, Robbie, whether it's either within the business, within Google, or you're seeing candidates externally, you talked a little bit about the pathway into Google, but from your own personal point of view, what impresses you? What do candidates do well when they go through the interview process?
I think it's very similar to Hannah and Ollie's advice in the previous weeks. I think it's painfully clear when candidates have planned, researched, have thought about questions. I think those are really critical pieces. So firstly, preparing, think ahead, plan your examples that are going to let your strengths shine in an interview, and make sure that they apply to the job description. So that's first thing, prepare. I think secondly, research, learn about the role, learn about the business, go out to stores. If in FMCG, I always loved it when candidates had been to store and had an opinion on the presence in store, and you can tell so much, as we know, by looking at a shelf of who's winning in a category and who's having some battles, and then just be real. I think being vulnerable and having some thoughtful questions that you genuinely want the answers to are going to impress. And when you get the answers, write them down and summarize them back. It just shows that you're listening. And I think the final point that I don't think Ollie and Hannah mentioned, I think it was a nice add, is follow up afterwards. If you enjoyed the interview, tell them that you enjoyed it and tell them why you enjoyed it. And if there was anything that you feel you missed or didn't get a chance to show, bring that in. Because it's not just about those 45 minutes or that hour. There's an opportunity to add that little bit more color after the interview as well. Yeah,
I think that a lot of that is quite fresh thinking, Robbie. I love your point on have an opinion. I think, again, too often you're people come into an interview and they feel, well, I'm there to smooth the path and put my best foot forward. But actually, if you've got a view, an opinion, and you should have one, then don't hide it, because that will provoke an interesting conversation, probably more interesting than perhaps the other candidates who are not sharing views and opinions. From every angle, it talks about the fact you've thought about it, you've perhaps prepared. The opinion, it needs to be based on something, in terms of research, but it enables you to kind of demonstrate what potentially you then bring to the business as a value add, as somebody who isn't just going to follow a pathway, but it's going to look to seek to add value by having an opinion, because that's what opinion does. It challenges perception and challenges a norm, and it enables thinking to move forward. So thoroughly agree with that one, which is great. I got one more final question, and I believe you may have a question from me, Robbie, afterwards. So I'll finish off just in terms of my questions. Again, just spitting it back to Google. Now, for those who are thinking, I wonder if I'm not quite ready for that step, or it's a step too far, to move to a tech company, but I feel my knowledge isn't quite there. What can people do to kind of develop skills and experience in the whole kind of digital e-com world?
It's a good question. I think we're all immersed in it, right? In the way that we shop and research at the moment. But I think within the business, I mean, certainly chat to your e-com team to understand their challenges and what they're working on. I think there's tons of resources. There's I think with Google, it's a free newsletter, so you can sign up. There's weekly case studies that will really help you familiarize with the kind of challenges that tech and e-com businesses work with, and how the marketing funnel applies to different businesses as well as your own. I mentioned Byron Sharp earlier as well, how that applies digitally. So I would invest in those kind of resources to really help grow your knowledge and your confidence. And then, I haven't had a chance to really say this yet, but I think investing in your network, when you take a step back and think about all those contacts that you have on LinkedIn, going through those and thinking, well, who from there is going to be able to help me learn more about the industry. People love being asked for advice. So reaching out through LinkedIn or just a phone call to catch up regularly with someone in the tech industry or in e-com, just to learn what are they going through, and investing in that every quarter in a coffee or a lunch. I really feel like that's how you will grow your knowledge, grow your confidence, and find those contacts that lead to the next role. We mentioned, L'Oreal at the beginning, where I started, where Hannah started. There's probably about 6 or 8 of us who were there together and have all gone on to different things. A couple of people have stayed at L'Oreal, a couple of people have gone on to other things, and really kept in touch. And I think back now to the network from that, we've kept in touch. And I was thinking in the lead up to this, I reckon there's at least 10 or 15 examples I can think of where we've helped each other out with advice, connections in furthering our careers. So my big message would be invest in that network, both in and outside of your business.
I think that's awesome advice. A network's not a passive thing, and to your point, people like being asked for advice. So I can't think of ever, when someone's picked up the phone to me or dropped me a note to say, can you help, that I've said no. As humans, we're programmed to want to help people, and there's some who do a better job than others of actually seeking it out, and what a difference it makes to not just building their profile in the world, but actually helping them make better decisions. So I think that's really good advice. Over to you, Robbie.
Yeah, Mike. I wanted to ask you, because I think this series has been great, by the way. I've had a chance to dip in and out of some of the sessions, but I want to hear from you, looking back over the series this year, which has been an interview that A, you've enjoyed the most, and B, has challenged your assumptions of what career development can mean, and why on those two.
Gosh, that's a good one. All the interviews are interesting in their own way. Someone said to me recently, I love the podcast. I binged 12 last weekend, and I found they got a bit samey towards the end. I was like, well, if you listen to 12 in a row, they're going to get a little bit samey. Yeah. But even then, there's not one that is the same, because everyone's pathway is different, the journey is different, advice is different, perspective is different. I'm also talking to give myself time to think of an answer here, Robbie, but
I've noticed.
I do find it hard to to pin one down, if I look back, and I'm going to look back over the whole series, one that really I keep coming back to was one of the earlier ones I did with Caroline Waite, who from Frucor Suntory, and Caroline, she didn't hold back from having an opinion. And she was very passionate about her views and thoughts and opinions, which was great. I think it made me realize early on we're onto something here, because people want to give back. There's a real appetite in senior leadership in Australia to actually contribute and help others with this whole process of making a great decision and just challenging perception. So Caroline, for example, was quite strong on her view that the sales director role, for example, is a tough gig, and it's not for everybody. And her advice, which I thought was really interesting, was it's amazing how many people talk about their goals and objectives and have big bold plans once a year. This annual review comes up, and all these goals and ambitions come to light, yet they never talk about them at any other time in the year. So they're not real. They're not. They're just for that moment. But whereas the reality is, if you have goals and ambitions, and everybody does, those who are likely to achieve them actually have that narrative ongoing. They are using their network internally, externally. That people are, that those goals are shared. There's a kind of, everybody feels therefore they're contributing to that individual's goals and objectives, and you're far more likely to achieve those, and be on all the right radars if you are vociferous. And that's not being bolshy or arrogant. It's just actually doing what you were talking about, which is using your network in a really smart way, to be comfortable with that career narrative on an ongoing basis, not once a year.
Yeah, I love that. No, Mike, you took your time to think of one there, but I'll definitely check that out. I didn't hear Caroline Waite's one, so I will do, and I really agree with that. Being super intentional, and it's not a once a year conversation, and make sure that those targets, career ambitions are genuinely meaningful to you, not what you think you should have down on the piece of paper on the PDP. So thank you. Great.
Well, Robbie, that's been awesome. Really, I was really looking forward to this session. Just taking a step out of the we've gone outside of FMCG fairly regularly through this season, but I really enjoyed just hearing about your move to Google, life in Google, some of the familiar challenges that any business faces, but also the perspectives given you in terms of that advice you've been able to give us through this session. So been really, really interesting. And thanks to all of our leaders this year. I think we've had 22 inspirational conversations. And in response to your question, Robbie, I'm now flicking through those in my mind, thinking of other things I could have talked about, but I'm comfortable with where I landed on Caroline's advice. Guys, we've now got, I think, 40 episodes. I think you're number 40, Robbie, on our podcast for Your Future in Sales and Marketing. So an incredible back catalogue of really good insight and advice. There's a lot of content there for you to dip in and out of, everybody. The pod's available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Obviously, other podcast providers are available, apparently, but I don't know where else you go. And a huge thank you as well to our producer and marketing manager here at AXR, Hazel Martinez-Bennett. Hazel jumped on the pod when my connection went earlier this series, and did a great job. And she tells me we've now cracked the top 5 for Australia's career podcast, which is really cool. And we're also very proud to be shortlisted for the Recruitment Brand of the Year by doing these kind of things and bringing what we aim to do to life. So great job, Hazel. So from everyone here at AXR, have a wonderful Christmas, and a well-deserved break, and may all your career goals and wishes come true for 2022. And if you're a regular listener, I think that's highly probable. So once again, thanks, Robbie.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks, everybody. Have a great day.